Hi, everybody here in Berlin, and hello, everybody on the internet, on the live stream. So, we're again streaming all the sessions in this room live on YouTube, and you can watch all of the sessions of yesterday and everything we will record today re-live on the YouTube channel of German UPA. So, you have the chance of watching all the sessions that happen in this room from now till eternity or till YouTube shuts down. So hope you'll have lots of fun today. And first session in this room will be by Jason, Shape Your Future Self. Plenty of fun, and I hand it over.
Thank you. Okay, thank you for coming. I know there's lots of great competition for great talks and stuff, and I hope what I share with you today can be useful in some ways. So I'm really, really glad to be back here. I come to Berlin almost every year. The only times in the past, maybe 10 to 12 years I haven't, is just due to lockdown, pandemic, which was a real shame. If you don't know where I live in Twickenham, it's just outside London in the UK, and it's about an hour and a half, 2 hours on a plane. But I actually live near a famous stadium, Twickenham Stadium, and I actually did a version of this talk at Chicago camps remotely from a new office space that I invested in recently. For those that don't know anything about rugby, it's kind of, this works better with an American audience, it's kind of like American football without all the armor and all the pausing and stopping. The funny thing is, when I was doing this talk in my new office, tranquil space away from home, right outside my window was like a festival going on outside, a disco festival. And out of my window, all the people were literally coming back from the stadium at the time my talk was starting. So that was a little bit distracting. I mean, it kind of looked something like this. And there's all these great, colorful people out in the streets. This looks more like Berlin than Twickenham. Twickenham is kind of like very leafy and calm, not really the hustle and bustle of London. But isn't it beautiful, all these people dressed up and expressing themselves in their fancy costumes? So as I mentioned, I moved from my home studio to an office near my home. This is what my office looked like when I left it. Yeah, maybe some of you can relate to some of it, but I know I cause kind of quite a lot of anxiety in people when I share this picture. But a lot of stuff was accumulating in the space physically, but also mentally for me. I was going through a lot of accumulation of stuff and trauma, very stressful projects that were happening in the pandemic, working for like a retail company that was basically trying to, had big shopping centers and was working out what to do. And I was partly involved in the homeschooling, not as much as my wife. I had an ex-colleague die before the pandemic. The pandemic started taking the edge off that, and another ex-colleague, one of the first people I mentored, happening towards the end of lockdown. And that really, really hit me hard, both of those, for various reasons. I also experienced a lot of professional loneliness. And I had the pain and frustration of trying to pivot the EuroIA conference, which I was a co-chair for, which was meant to be in Berlin, to being online when we really didn't know what the fuck we were doing. It was really hard. And amongst all this, there was a shining light, which was pursuing a new career in coaching for me. So I've mentored a lot of people throughout my career and managed and led them, but I wanted to learn how to do that better. So I pursue that, and that's a big part of my working life now. So at the time, my new office space is a little bit cleaner and tidy. There's lots of cables and stuff, as I have like a fancy setup there. But it's a little bit more tranquil. But the idea of me doing this is to kind of focus on finishing my book and a lot of other things that I tend to mount up. This is actually a tool that I'm playing with called the focus jar that helps kind of like me to prioritize some focus into kind of like big metaphorical balls of stuff like the marbles in a jar. And I'm hoping to get some beta copies. This is currently in alpha, this copy here, available in summer. But we'll see how that goes. So I have to kind of relieve myself a lot of the stresses of doing that. But the interesting thing is it's not really a book. Not a typical book that you write and you read and you kind of sit on a beach. It's a toolkit. It really is one of these playbooks, but for yourself. like a self-strategy toolkit. And the whole purpose of it is to help you understand yourself better so that you can sharpen your future focus. I like this kind of metaphor of a kaleidoscope. So lots of different lenses that you can look at yourself through and see all of your true colors. So the tools themselves are kind of lots of visual canvases that you essentially draw on, and the input is the output. And that's important here. Rather than fill in a form and then get a visual representation, as you're doing it, you're understanding yourself and kind of feeling your way and feeling your shape in some ways. And you can just redraw it or do it in lots of different ways, do it on your own piece of paper. But that's what they look like, nicely put together there with my colleague and friend, Eva Lotta Lamb. And the tools are organized into 6 key modes of self-strategy, from grounding yourself and understanding where you are right now to where you were in the past, to prioritizing and profiling and positioning yourself to then envision a future self for yourself and then plan how you get towards it. Very similar to kind of like a design or strategy process in some ways. And so like one of the pages in the book kind of looks like this. It's kind of like a visual map of these little thumbnails. But I'm also trying to create another way to navigate it based on some common context that I've been made aware of throughout my career and people come to me about. So whether you're starting out in your career or switching to UX from another, at a crossroads in your career, or a new leader, or going into a new direction, or maybe you've just lost the love for what you do and you don't know what to do next. I wonder whether some of you can relate to any of these. And then what's happening in the book is essentially that these are then have a sequence of how to use the many tools that you could do to kind of give you a kind of more tailored version of what I might prescribe for you in a particular session or within some coaching. And the tools themselves are kind of like a very simple structure, a little visual canvas and a little bit how to do it, and then some other ways that you can twist and turn them to your own desires and add other dimensions or extend them further or do them with more people other than yourself. So I've just kind of like just showed you, and it's not. I didn't want to make this a sale for the book. I'm never going to make enough money out of selling a book. It's for UX. That's not why I am doing this. Because I believe that every designer is different. Like snowflakes, we're all absolutely unique and beautiful with lots of great potential. Oftentimes, we can also be very delicate like snowflakes. But we often put people in boxes. We like it. It helps us in lots of different ways to try and say, you're one of them, you're one of them. And in the early stages of our career, that can be helpful. Belong to this tribe. I'm an interaction designer, or I'm an information architect, or I'm a researcher, or whatever. But they never really define ourselves individually. They're just containers for a period of time that make it easier for someone else to kind of get a vibe of what we're about. They don't define us. And then the other thing that's very common in the industry for various good reasons is that we create these career ladders for people, assuming that the only way is up, baby. Or you might take, a manager or a kind of like more IC leadership path, but it's always like progressing upwards. What's that about? To where? Where are we going to? I coach people. I know people. I was one who got to the top of the ladder and was like, I don't know what to do, and I almost fell off. Like, it's these things kind of test us. So, is it the right metaphor for us, or that we have all these kind of same paths, career paths that we've followed? And you speak to someone about their career path, it's never the same as someone else's. It's very rarely the same, and yet we kind of have these very linear paths of people, maybe 2 or 3 paths, but we're all just kind of following and go, well, you should end up over here. Is that right? It's more kind of windy and stuff, more like this kind of diagram from Goosebumps, I think it is. So, I do believe that boxes, ladders, and paths can be useful in some contexts, and I understand that. It clarifies things for us. But is it enough? And, in 2023, I don't know what it is. It's like here in Berlin or wherever you are all from, but, we're getting pretty hit hard. For ages, we've had this title confusion around the boxes. Who are we? What do we? How do we define ourselves? But the more contentious point is this design homogeneity that we experience and we see, like where the work that is being produced is very similar, generic, and is not really truly creative and expressive. And I put, to some extent, the usability community and the parts of the user experience work that we do at fault here to some extent. And also there are rising divides within design across different factions, research versus design, or even kind of particular design leaders, new ones attacking the older ones. And in an industry where we're kind of feeling like we're coming under attack and losing our value, I don't think these divides help us. And I don't know what it's like here, but people are struggling to find work or scared of leaving a job because they'll struggle to find work because of all these layoffs, which we don't understand why. And, AI. So it feels like we're losing our power and our agency as an industry, but more importantly, as individuals. If we ever really had it, maybe we deluded ourselves. So people are feeling lost, they're feeling burnt out, they're at risk of kind of losing their own identity. And with that, there's an impact on your potential. You're limiting your potential if you get put in these boxes on these set paths and set ladders. Can any of you relate to that? So my question to you is, how can you shape the futures you want by shaping yourself more intentionally? So I'm just going to kind of, metaphors are fun. I'm going to play with this metaphor and popular design trope. You've probably heard of pace or shearing layers, this idea that kind of different aspects of fashion or nature can happen at different, changing at different speeds. Or like the notion of a house, like the stuff in the inside might change more frequently than the stuff on the outside than the foundations. And this model and this metaphor has been used in lots of different aspects of design and technology, and even for career paths. A peer of mine, Richard Rutter, has done this. He's from Clearleft, a really helpful model for career paths. I wanted to extend it a bit further into this kind of really extend it to this notion of the planet, and just think about this idea of layers. And maybe there's this kind of layer above the planet itself, which is all this stuff that changes so frequently. And it's quite fluid and kind of hard to pin down, almost gassy. So it's all the rhetoric we have, the job titles, the roles, and all these different demands. And you should do this, you should do that. Versus then when we kind of ground ourselves on more the physical things that we create for the world, the products, the services, the infrastructure, down to the C, which is maybe more our practices, our technical skills, and our methods. Down deeper in ourselves, the foundational skills, the things maybe we learn at school that we forget about, that are actually we should constantly be developing, talking, writing, listening, sketching, abstracting, thinking, structuring, these things underpinning our skills that are more technical. And getting deeper into the mantle, thinking about what our own experiences are in different contexts, and our softer, more human, interpersonal teamwork skills, and the many personas we wear in different situations with different people. And under that, going into the outer core of our values and our qualities and our behaviors, and ultimately to who we really are, our true self, our purpose, and our passions. So, if we take this kind of loose metaphor of this planets and the atmosphere, it's interesting because the stuff on the outside of the atmosphere changes more frequently than the stuff deeper down, but it's harder to understand the stuff deeper down within you. It's more lonely because it's more unique. But we need to understand that. It helps to understand that to better express who we are and manifest and create great things for the world. It takes a lot of reflection and self-discovery to do that. So I'd ask you a question to think through. Which layers of self are you most connected to and conscious of developing in your career? So that's a lot. A few different metaphors already. I don't expect you'll get exactly the same message out of this talk. There's lots of different things going on, different layers to it, I suppose. But I want to just give you something a lot simpler to think about. This is Martin Neumeyer, famous kind of brand strategist, and he has 3 questions for brands. Who are you? What do you do? And why does it matter? And it's an interesting set of questions to ask for yourself, because who you are is not necessarily what you do. And why it matters should drive it and be related, should it not? So a brief little kind of overview just to illustrate this is who am I and what do I do and why does it matter? So I run a consultancy and I'm part of a creative network. I'm also part of Interaction Design Association London, designer of many years and a coach more recently. And I'm all these different kind of personas in different situations, and I'm slightly different in those situations. But I'm also many other things in my life. I'm many different people in the same person. And I'm doing a lot of work to try and reconcile and understand which bits I like, which bits I don't, which bits feel really close to who I am, which feels like things that are like massively intentional on a piece of elastic that might snap. So what do I do? Well, I help people and organizations explore positive futures. And that's either through the product and strategy work that I do, or the people and their own change to help make better things. So, I do a bunch of stuff like team development, team coaching, individual coaching, and some other things that you may do in your work. But a lot of it is around, in my sort of free time, is the shaping stuff that I'm going to talk about. So why does it matter? Well, I think that a lot of us are very lost at times in our life. If you aren't now, you might be in the future. Several times. We're uncertain of how our futures may play out. And I believe that people can benefit from having support from others to help advance with confidence and through the uncertainty of their present and their potential futures. I know this because of my experience. I was really lost. I was on the most beautiful beach in the world in Brazil, and I was experiencing one of the darkest times of my career, and life, in fact. And it was all because of a fucking email from a client at the end of a project. And I don't know, I've had people die in my life, family members, friends, but this kind of hit harder for some reason. The reason is because it hit my value system. It was everything that was against what I stood for and how I wanted to act. So what was the disconnect there? So I sought a coach from this lady, Julia Whitney, and we did a bunch of reflection work to work out who and what I was beyond the titles and into the passions, anxieties, and roots of me. Doing that deeper work to get to the core. And this was actually one of the tools she gave me, and it's actually a tool that I was planning to use in a workshop, and it's part of the book. It's a very popular book tool, which is like doing a kind of like a customer journey map, experience map of you and your life and your career. And this was the actual one I did on the flight to Brazil. And you can see there's lots of peaks and lots of troughs. And I realized a lot about my experiences. My highs don't last very long. I come down pretty hard afterwards, sometimes sinking really low. And I'm working on that to not go as low and to sustain some of the higher parts. She also gave me a tool called the Wheel of Life, and I separated them out to kind of like work life and personal life, where you look at different areas of your life and try to map yourself on how happy you are in all these different areas. And community actually came up in both aspects, big part of who I am. And you can see here that I wasn't very happy in a lot of areas of my life. Part of my perfectionist tendencies, maybe, critical tendencies. So, I'd experienced a lot of mild racism, I guess, being a kind of half Turkish Cypriot guy in a very white, privileged, expensive private school. I got a scholarship. I was, a different demographic, different class, different culture. I'm also a dad, many different personas, and I also try to make music and do other things. I'm trying to do more of that now because it's fun, right? Kids are hard. They're fun, but they're hard. I'm also many different roles and job titles and stuff. And, I love Ted Lasso. You should watch Ted Lasso. I'd like to be more Ted. But the big part of being who I am is, like I say, this part of being a community. So being an attendee, listening, reading things, to ultimately getting on stage against all my fears and actually speaking and then running my own events. So this is just a starter, kind of what I came up with these aspects of me, parts of me. But I wanted to use this to kind of help to focus. And so I kind of created a strategic framework, and I've just hidden some of the things here, where I had a vision. It was a very badly written vision statement, and had some clear outcomes of what I wanted to achieve in my life and some principles of how I wanted to behave and be, and then ultimately some initiatives of like what I was going to do about that. Similar to what I'm trying to help people with in coaching and also in the shaping book. Can't really use Michael Jackson these days, but, if you do want to make the world a better place, it can really help to look at yourself first. So I was thinking, how could I change and how could I play a part in making the world a better place? So having interviewed and worked with and managed and mentored and led a lot of people, like I said before, we're all different. And it's interesting, this is Sammy's business card. I don't know if he still has this business card, back of his business card. And depending on who he's meeting, he basically crosses out different things to kind of say, because he's a multitude of things. He's a very, polymathical guy, I guess. But it's interesting because like we have these models that help to kind of contain and structure our thinking about our differences. The T-shaped designer or the broken comb model from Jared Spool, or even this notion of the UX spectrum. And these models all help in different ways, but they just take lots of different lenses of ourselves. And I think they're all useful. I mean, no single model is going to be really, really perfect. So I decided one of the things I could do to help people was to run these shaping workshops. So I believe I could use these visual frameworks that I've been using for many of my years, like maybe 17, 18 years, to engage designers in their self-reflection, to help guide their future development, gather data to develop more robust industry-wide models, failed, and develop stronger bespoke competency frameworks for organizations. Maybe not failed so much. And I've done, I need to update this map probably, but I've run workshops at various conferences around the world for corporate organizations, remotely, in person, and various people through the articles I've written have taken some of the tools and run it in their organizations. So I believe it's kind of touched like thousands of people across the world, and still people are reading my Medium articles around it. Essentially in the workshops, what we do is get people to map themselves against these visual frameworks to kind of gather data within a team maybe, or with yourself, and prime your own thinking so you can kind of see the diversity within yourself and also amongst others. And then use that to kind of create your own bespoke maps. And when we're doing physical workshops, we'd play with Skittles and stuff to kind of make it more physical and interactive and playful. And then use that to kind of like help to encourage where in a team, there might be skill gaps or kind of overemphasis on particular areas or strengths in those. And what you can do with that is then work out where people in the organization can help mentor others who want the help. So you don't have to go outside to invest in training. I want to give a little bit of a snapshot of some of the frameworks and go into more detail. I showed a version of the career timeline, so I won't spend too much time on it, but it's just a little build on it where you have like this emotional curve and then you annotate it and you kind of put your particular stages of your career and like what your titles were, just to jog your memory. Maybe you go onto LinkedIn and just check what you actually did and all those things. Maybe map your seniority, and you can kind of add other kind of swim lanes to this if you really wanted to. You could do this for your whole career. You could do it for your last year or your last month, your last week, in lots of different ways. It's just like taking like a typical design tool we might use and put it on ourselves. Affectionately called blob mapping, it's probably changing for the book, is this notion of mapping your current competency. And this is a very kind of familiar one I'd often start with people. It's based on this old adaptive path framework that colleagues of mine kind of borrowed and adapted. So they took these kind of 4 categories of kind of fields of practice within design at the time, UX, and we would draw shapes around them in these different kind of weird quadrants, and then kind of indicate with arrows like where people might want to grow and develop. And then the really key thing with all of these tools is there's just a little prompt to probe, and the key is in kind of asking the questions and making reflections on the pieces of paper. So you see there's lots of scribbles around here. So I expanded this into kind of like capturing more UI-based things when I was leading design teams, and I put copyrighted in there, which is always contentious. But because of like people coming from more marketing background, I had that in there too. And then a recruitment company came to me and wanted to do a thing which they wanted to call the UX spectrum. I said that someone else got one, but I'll do it. And kind of revisited some of these and added some more categories. And we made an interactive tool that you can kind of do on your mobile phone and just kind of like just kind of mark different areas. And I added product strategy and customer experience. I was really unhappy with just resolving all the UI stuff down to visual design. I think it's more nuanced than that. But I split out research into quantitative and qualitative and brought in content strategy as well. What was interesting with this one was that people who were looking to hire would start to kind of work out what kind of shape they thought they needed for a role. And then the individuals who were looking for a role could kind of like quickly just do a version of what they thought they were. And then they could have a, maybe more closer matching of people, supply and demand. But what was also interesting is if you took some of the archetypes at the time of like titles, and this is loose, right? But you see these patterns where maybe a product designer would have a little bit more product strategy than a UI/UX designer. And maybe service designers would be a bit more on the customer experience, but UX strategists being less about sort of more interface and more traditional design kind of skills. And these things change all the time, but they became useful handles for people to go, it's kind of more like that we want, or more like this. But something beyond just the title. And then, a hero of mine, Brenda Laurel, amazing individual. She's like, you do all this stuff. You're like a structuralist. I go, I am not. But, it'd be really good to develop this further for the IXDA community. And so we kind of, at the conference in Seattle, we extended the framework a little bit further and put more categories, and all at a similar type of level. This is a really key point. All fields of practice that are kind of have a whole industry of their own almost. And we created this kind of radial chart, and people love radial charts, but I was probably one of the first people to be doing them for UX. But my book isn't all about radial charts. So I have to warn people. That's like, you're the radial chart guy. I am not. So we got people to do that and then plaster the walls with these things. You could see, like, no one was the same. Even just on this one lens, everyone was different. That's cool. And people would understand themselves a bit better. When I was interviewing people, I would often ask them a question towards the end of the interview, and I would say, are you more UX or UI? And this was before all the memes. And it wasn't meant to be a trick question. It was just that if someone was more on the UI side and they'd shown a lot of process stuff, I'd like, you're more on UI? Show me more of that then. I want to see more of that. Or if they said they were more on the UX side and they didn't have any process side, I'd go, tell me more about that. I'll dig into it. I was going, it's cool. It's just a little handle. But it was like, it's a false dichotomy. They're not really opposites at all, right? We know that. And so what other false dichotomies could we have? So I kind of like put these on a little framework, like research versus design, strategy versus delivery. And what I would do is get people to, mark where they thought their center of gravity was, where they seemed most comfortable or where they spend most of their time. And then also kind of like indicate their range, like through these kind of brackets, like how far into one area do they go versus another. And then add arrows to either move their gravity or move the boundaries. Now, at first, I didn't like this exercise. So some people are like, what is this weird thing? And it's similar to kind of like what you might do in a brand exercise. But it really helps stretch the thinking. And was a really good priming tool to just kind of go, I don't know. And just to kind of search within yourself a bit more. So I use these kind of dichotomies in a lot of different things, like in leadership as well, because there's always a range that you might have. And some things are beyond your range, and some things are where like your real comfort zone is. Another tool is related to kind of softer skills, but see if this works. I'd be interested if you could answer this question on this Menti thing. I'll give you a few minutes. Let me know if you can get in and it works. Otherwise, I have to do some jiggery pokery. And just answer the question, what are the most important qualities of a modern day designer? Does it work? Yes. Is it a hard question? Yeah.
Is there a next question?
Just submit. There is, but don't answer that question. I'll let you keep answering that question if you want to finish. Maybe try and finish in the next minute or so. And I've asked this question many times when I've done talks or workshops, and I often get similar results. I'll show you some in a bit. But back in 2005, I was very interested in kind of this question around what makes a good experience architect, what we used to call ourselves in the agency I was at. And so I did some research with some colleagues, peers, clients of all sorts, and I asked them a question, more open question than the qualities question. What makes a good one of us? And I distilled this list down into these kind of key kind of attributes or skills. And you can see here, there's a whole bunch of stuff that relates to more foundational, interpersonal, these softer skills, not so much on the technical skills. They didn't voice much of that. There's a bit of the knowledge and understanding, but team player was up the top. And then empathy, the dreaded empathy. But empathy not just for the users, but the business and the tech. We've been talking about that for many, many years. And still, I don't believe we have empathy for any of those most of the time, let alone, the business or tech side. And I decided to kind of create a radial chart. This was the first one I created, and get people to assess their peers based on their interaction. So, you get another designer assessing the designer, developer, project manager, and the client. And we kind of created these shapes, and we kind of saw these different patterns, and we decided to do Jacob Niels at the time, if you even know who he is, and just do a kind of projection of what we thought of him, the usability guru. And then kind of started to play with metaphors to make a poster. This was actually for the first EuroIA. And so using these kind of visual metaphors around being good listeners, having a silver tongue, talking well, and a balanced brain between the creative and the analytical, and the heart of gold, and strong backbone to stand up for your ideas, or the safe hands and arms and legs of delivery, very tenuous. Or the one that I really love, this notion of the bifocal eye. So being able to have long-term vision, but also an anal attention for detail. Now, the reality is that you can't easily be all of these things. So no one was really strong across them all. And yet we kind of have these frameworks, which is assume we are. But it was super interesting how many of these were different and helped to define it. So it was called creating the perfect experience architect, which is deliberately tongue-in-cheek. The perfect experience architect was many together. So I still use this to this day, and you do a similar thing. You kind of mark where you were at, and then I also I'm always interested in kind of see whatever else comes up and capture that as well. But as I said, when I do the Menti thing, I typically get lots of things. You see empathy there. Let's have a look, see what we've got for you guys. Okay. I'll post it in the Slack. The technology. But what was interesting, when I did some analysis on this, empathy wasn't the strongest, even though it seemed to be in these kind of word clouds. When you started to looking at it, curiosity was a really key thing. I love curiosity. I think curiosity is way more powerful than empathy. Empathy is really dangerous for a coach and a UX designer. And we can debate that, but it doesn't necessarily help you. It can stand in your way. But creativity was in there too. Great. Where is it? And collaboration, obviously, but we still struggle with that, right? So another popular tool that I have is one around leadership. And this was born out of an experience when I was looking for a job. And I thought it was the perfect opportunity for me. And I got ghosted. This was before ghosting became cool. Right? I got ghosted really badly. And I was like, why? And I eventually chased them. After they approached me and everything, I know this is common now. It wasn't back then. And I was like, well, what was it that they were looking for? And I started working with a friend of mine, Martina Hodges-Shell, to work out all the dimensions and functions and responsibilities of leadership and what they might be. And so we kind of created this framework where, in a similar way, we were writing these polls and kind of going, what's the range between this and this? And it was always the craft work, the design detailing work versus this. And so in this kind of thing, we kind of turned all those polls kind of around in this octagon, I think it is. And so if you imagine the craft being at the center and all these other things being on the outer, imagining where you kind of fit on those scales, and asking a few different questions. One, where do you spend your time relatively? Loads of time or none of your time across these different areas? So things like vision and strategy, working in external community, doing stuff within your team, focusing on quality or your field of practice, collaborating with others, helping build wider organization capabilities, or helping to sell and advocate design. But then the interesting thing is then if you do a different color and you start to map your enjoyment levels of those things. And then you see the delta and you go, oh. And then you kind of do your confidence in those areas. And there's often a kind of relationship between confidence and enjoyment sometimes, not always. But when you have these kind of three layers on top of this same framework, you go, oh, what am I doing? And then if you do it in a leadership team or amongst your team, you go, oh, you really like the thing I hate and you're really good at it. Why am I doing it? And it's like, yeah, it's super interesting. And so people started using this in interviews with employers and going, like, well, tell me what this role's about, like, because this is my shape. And they go, I don't know. So that's a really useful tool. That one of my favorites actually, and because of these multiple dimensions, because it instructs quite a lot just by very quick kind of shape making. So often in a workshop, in a team or kind of public workshop, I get people to put the charts up, and it's a lot to take in. But the point being is you look at these charts, and like I've said before, very rare that in one particular lens there's anyone that's the same, right? But when you have multiple lenses, no chance, because you're all unique and different, right? So it's nice. It's a cool looking thing to have these up, but it's helpful. You can kind of like layer things off, and this is all self-reflection. I'm sure there'll be questions around that. There always is. And you can do it digitally. This is a horrible PowerPoint one I had to do. But this was the leadership one. And you can see all these different patterns of leaders and stuff in there, different colors and shapes and things. So you can run it online. I've been running these on Murals and Miro. I still prefer people to print them out and draw them for various reasons, but there is a push to kind of make it digital. And I'm just trying to find a way to help make that kind of more so that the input is the output, because I think that's critical. But we'll see in time. But it's quite useful doing these things on the digital whiteboards because you can cluster in different ways and organize in different ways and redistribute. I put them in an Airtable and all that kind of stuff. Quite useful for teams. One of the last exercises I do in a workshop, and I actually use this exercise a lot in coaching in a different frame, is this notion of a leaving card. So first of all, having done a lot of exercises, thinking about yourself and your people around you, kind of thinking about what the business needs, the market needs, what you think you need and where you're at. And then try to think further forwards to a future end state. Now, a logical progression would be to kind of go from A to B to C to D to E to work out what G is, right? But some of us know that sometimes it's better to leap further forwards into the future and create a future obituary or a press release on the future or whatever. Again, kind of design, strategy, visioning tools, and then find a way to kind of come back. Because it's easier to kind of unshackle yourself from all the constraints if you think further forwards. So the leadership card is based on this premise. I actually inspired by the 80th birthday party exercise where that my coach gave me, where she asked me to kind of think about all the people in my life that I cared about and what they might say about me. What impact did I have on them? How was I when I was doing that? And there's a lot loaded in those two different questions. So I get people to kind of write from the perspective of others in a future state. So using lenses of others and a future state. So kind of like building rapport when interviewing users, but you were kind and